Joe Rogan surprised everyone by sharing his insights about the Apollo mission about whether the moon landing was fake or not. He also said that even if you don't believe in the conspiracy theory, you should still recognize that some people have valid doubts about the moon landing. Joe Rogan explained the evidence that changed his mind about the moon landing. According to Joe Rogan, he believed in the moon landing until he noted very important details about physics in the original video of the Apollo mission. Skeptics have been challenging the existence of the moon landing site for a very long time, and finally, after groundbreaking research and a new discovery, new information about the 1969 moon landing has been leaked. And scientists have emerged, leaving no room for doubt or speculation about the reality of the moon landing. According to experts, apart from the rocks and soil samples collected during the moon landing, there were three main objects left behind by the astronauts that have not been previously identified. The shocking revelations are a game changer, and the world will never look at the moon landing in the same way again. So, the moon landing is one of the most significant achievements in human history. The first lunar landing, which occurred on July 20th, 1969, was a monumental moment in the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. At the time of the moon landing in 1969, the geopolitical situation between the United States and Russia, then the Soviet Union, was tense and competitive. The two countries were engaged in a Cold War, a state of political and military tension, which lasted from the end of World War II until the early 1990s. The two superpowers were engaged in an arms race and competed in various areas such as space exploration, technology, and influence in other countries. The moon landing was seen as a significant achievement for the United States and served as a demonstration of its technological and scientific superiority over the Soviet Union. However, there are those who claim that the moon landing never happened and that the images and footage of the event were faked. According to Joe Rogan, he has watched many convincing documentaries that explain why they believe the moon landing was a fake. But according to Joe, they show footage that appears fake to him, and some of it seems edited or manipulated. Some footage shows the astronauts moving as if they were on wires or bouncing on trampolines. Rogan said, "The physics are different in different videos. This is where it gets weird, like the physics are different from the Apollo 11 moon landing. We see them waddle around on the surface of the moon. They're moving like half speed, and then you see them in other ones, like the one where they bounce around the area. They're moving different. They're in the same thing, but it looks different." According to Joe, it has been confirmed that they filmed many training exercises for the moon landing. Therefore, it is possible that they also made some of that footage look like they were on the moon, when they were not. Additionally, there is evidence that they took a fake photograph and tried to pass it off as a real space photo. Rogan continued, "If that is already been proven that they took this fake photograph and they tried to pass it off as a real space, it's entirely possible that some of the stuff that they filmed, they made out to look like they were on the moon, when they were not." According to Joe Rogan, USA had a big motive to fake the moon landing. During the Cold War, the United States was in a race against the Soviet Union to reach the moon. The United States believed it was important to win this race, and one of the reasons for this was to outdo the Soviet Union. It is well known that the Russians faked some of their footage, including footage of Yuri Gagarin's first flight into space. Also, one of the main arguments made by the moon landing deniers is that the shadows in the photos taken on the moon do not match up. They claim that the shadows should be pointing in different directions, depending on the location of the light source. For example, if the sun were the only light source on the moon, then the shadows should all be pointing in the same direction. However, moon landing deniers argue that the shadows in the photos are pointing in different directions, which they claim is evidence that the images were faked. However, this argument ignores the fact that there are other light sources on the moon besides the sun. The moon's surface reflects light from the sun, which can create multiple light sources and cause shadows to point in different directions. In addition, the terrain on the moon is uneven, which can also cause shadows to appear in different directions. These factors can explain the apparent inconsistencies in the shadows in the moon landing photos, and there is no evidence to suggest that they were faked. Also, one of the main arguments made by people who don't believe in moon landing is that the Van Allen radiation belts would have been lethal to astronauts. The Van Allen radiation belts are two concentric belts of charged particles that surround the Earth. They are formed by the Earth's magnetic field, and they can be hazardous to spacecraft and astronauts. Conspiracy theorists claim that the radiation levels in the Van Allen belts would have been too high for the astronauts to survive, and that this proves that the moon landings were faked. However, the Apollo spacecraft were designed to withstand the radiation in space. The spacecraft had thick walls and radiation shields to protect the astronauts from the radiation. In addition, the Apollo missions were carefully planned to avoid the most hazardous parts of the Van Allen belts. The astronauts traveled through the belts quickly, spending only a few hours passing through them, which minimized their exposure to radiation. Another argument is that the film used to record the moon landings would have been destroyed by the radiation. They claim that the radiation in space would have caused the film to become overexposed and unusable. However, the film used in the Apollo missions was specially designed to withstand radiation, and it was stored in radiation-resistant containers. In addition, the film was developed on Earth, which would have eliminated any radiation damage. In addition, one of the arguments moon landing deniers use to support their claim is that there are no stars visible in the pictures of the moon landings. They argued that if the pictures were taken on the moon, then there should be stars visible in the background, and the absence of stars proves that the pictures were faked. One of the reasons that there are no stars visible in the pictures of the moon landings is that the cameras used by the astronauts were not designed to capture stars. The cameras were specifically designed to take pictures of the surface of the moon and the astronauts, and were not equipped to capture the dim light of stars. The cameras had a relatively small aperture, which made it difficult to capture the faint light of stars. Another reason that stars are not visible in the pictures of the moon landings is that the exposure settings used by the astronauts were not set up to capture stars. The exposure settings used by the astronauts were designed to capture the bright surface of the moon and the astronauts in their spacesuits. These settings would have made it difficult to capture the faint light of the stars in the background. The lack of stars in the pictures of the moon landings does not prove that the pictures were faked. The brightness of the surface of the moon and the astronauts would have made it difficult to capture the faint light of stars, even if the cameras and exposure settings had been designed to do so. In addition, the lack of an atmosphere on the moon would have made the stars appear much dimmer than they would on Earth, further complicating the task of capturing them in photographs. Also, another argument to deny the moon landing is that the American flag planted on the moon appears to be waving in the wind. They argue that there is no wind on the moon, and therefore the flag could not have been waving. However, this argument is not a valid one and can be easily debunked. The flag planted on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission was designed to have a stiff metal rod along the top, which gave it a waving appearance in the low gravity of the moon. The flag was not actually waving due to wind or any other external force. Instead, it was waving due to the motion of the astronauts as they planted the flag into the lunar soil. The astronauts were twisting and turning the flagpole to secure it in place, which caused the flag to appear to be waving in the footage. The lack of atmosphere on the moon also contributed to the appearance of the flag waving. There is no air resistance on the moon, which means there is no air to dampen the motion of objects. This lack of air resistance means that any motion on the moon, no matter how slight, will continue until it is stopped by another force. This means that the motion of the flag caused by the astronauts would continue until it gradually came to a stop on its own. Furthermore, the technological advancements that made this feat possible were many. One of the most important was the development of rocket technology. Rockets were necessary to launch spacecraft out of the Earth's atmosphere and propel them towards the moon. The Saturn V rocket, which was used in the Apollo missions, was the most powerful rocket ever built at that time. It had 3 stages, each with its own set of engines, and could generate a thrust of 7.5 million pounds. Another key technological development was the creation of guidance and control systems. These systems were crucial for the success of the mission, as they allowed the spacecraft to be precisely aimed at the moon and accurately controlled during the landing. The Apollo guidance and navigation system used a computer that was smaller than today's laptops and had less processing power than a modern-day calculator. The development of spacesuits was also crucial for the success of the mission. Spacesuits had to be designed to protect the astronauts from the harsh conditions of space, including extreme temperatures, radiation, and a lack of oxygen. The suit also had to provide the astronauts with mobility and the ability to perform tasks while on the lunar surface. The Apollo spacesuits were made of multiple layers of material, including fire-resistant materials and a special fabric called beta cloth, which was used to protect against micrometeoroids. Communications technology was also critical for the success of the mission. Communication between the spacecraft and mission control on Earth was essential for the safety of the astronauts and the success of the mission. The Apollo missions used a series of tracking stations around the world to maintain communication with the spacecraft. The technology used to transmit voice, data, and images across vast distances was incredibly advanced for its time. The development of the lunar module was another significant technological advancement. The lunar module was designed to land on the moon's surface and provide a shelter for the astronauts during their stay. It had to be light enough to be launched from the Earth, and yet sturdy enough to withstand the harsh lunar environment. The module was also equipped with a descent engine that allowed it to land softly on the moon's surface. Some skeptics have raised concerns about the safety of the astronauts during their journey to and from the moon, particularly with regard to radiation exposure. To begin with, it's important to understand that radiation is a serious concern in space exploration. The The sun emits harmful radiation that can cause a range of health problems, from skin damage to cancer. And even more, cosmic rays from distant stars and galaxies pose a significant threat to astronauts traveling outside the protective magnetic field of the Earth. To mitigate these risks, NASA took several steps to ensure the safety of the astronauts during the Apollo missions. First and foremost, the spacecraft used on the Apollo missions were designed with radiation protection in mind. The spacecraft's outer walls were made of a material called aluminium that provided some protection against solar radiation. The spacecraft's windows were made of a special type of glass that filtered out harmful ultraviolet radiation. The astronauts themselves were also protected from radiation exposure in several ways. During their journey to and from the Moon, the astronauts spent most of their time inside the spacecraft, which provided additional shielding from radiation. The astronauts wore specially designed spacesuits that provided additional protection from radiation. The suits were made of several layers of material that blocked harmful radiation from reaching the astronauts' bodies. The Apollo missions were carefully timed to minimize the astronauts' exposure to radiation. NASA planned the missions to coincide with periods of low solar activity, during which the sun emits fewer harmful particles. The spacecraft's trajectory was carefully calculated to minimize the astronauts' exposure to cosmic radiation during their journey to and from the Moon. Also, the sheer number of people involved in the mission makes it impossible for it to have been a hoax. Over 400,000 people were involved in the Apollo program, which included not only the astronauts, but also scientists, engineers, technicians, and support staff. These individuals worked tirelessly to design, build, and test the spacecraft, as well as plan and execute the mission to the Moon. Given the sheer scale of the operation, it is implausible that so many people could have conspired to fake the Moon landing without anyone coming forward to reveal the truth. Even more, the success of the Apollo program was dependent on the collaboration and coordination of a vast network of organizations and individuals. The mission involved not only NASA, but also several private contractors, including Boeing, North American Aviation, and IBM. The Apollo program required the construction of numerous specialized facilities, including the Kennedy Space Center, the Johnson Space Center, and the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. All of these organizations and individuals would have had to be complicit in the alleged hoax, which is simply not feasible. The evidence supporting the Moon landing's authenticity is overwhelming. The astronauts brought back over 800 pounds of moon rocks, which have been extensively studied and confirmed to be of extraterrestrial origin. The scientific data collected during the mission, including photographs and geological samples, has been widely analysed and confirmed by experts in multiple fields. That's it for today. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell.